After what had felt like an eternity, the labor had finally come to an end. It was a rare moment of pure silence and peace that Princess-Consort Colyette found herself in as the midwives had bundled off the newborn babes to be bathed and swaddled, and Christofax had gone trotting after like a lovesick puppy. In all their years together, she could never say that she had seen him quite so happy, and while there had been some clear hesitation to leave her side, Colyette had given him a simple nod of affirmation to ease his mind. The task was done, and she was in no more danger now that it was over. Now she lay in her own bed, the soiled sheets and bedclothes hastily switched for fresh, clean ones to help keep her comfortable, and her pillows still soaked through with sweat. A hot bath would be a luxury she would appreciate more than anything, but at the moment she felt too weak and wobbly in the legs to stir from her bed at all. Truth be told, now that she thought about it, Colyette could recall very little of the details of the birth. The sheer amount of focus required not to break down weeping and crying from the pain had made the hours blur together until she was not certain if it had been Christofax squeezing a hand in his or one of the midwives coaching her. The only truly vivid memory she had of the entire ordeal was the prayers she had gasped out between the contractions, and now that she was alone, she could take a moment to give thanks for her good fortune. She was privileged to be a noblewoman in the greatest Duero city in the world, attended to by the finest selection of nursemaids and physicians that could be procured. Twins were often seen as a symbol of plenty and good fortune, but there were few women who could survive the stress that bearing 2 children at once placed on their bodies. It was a miracle she had overheard one of the chief physicians muttering that a woman of her build was in such good health and had been able to deliver both babes without serious injury. "Saint Myrna the Defiant, I offer my thanks for your patronage," she murmured quietly to herself. "As you once stood against the shadow, so you have given me the strength to stand against the shadow of death and emerge unscathed. Pray for me and for my sons, bloodied bride, that we live lives of peace and mercy, and let not my womb be tainted as yours was by the ministrations of the vile Iron Hand, Argenta." As she finished her short prayer, the silence was broken and a smile pulled at the edges of her lips. She could hear the soft mewling cries of her sons being brought back into the chamber, and as exhausted as she was, there could be no true rest until she had held her babies in her arms and seen their faces for the first time. The door opened and Christofax shuffled in, each arm curled around the tiniest little bundles that Colyette had ever seen. Wrapped tight in warm blankets, with only their little faces poking out, she saw her sons for the first time and felt her heart swell in her chest. The feeling was indescribable, a mix of pride and love and relief that all had ended well. Her husband walked with careful steps, struggling to even look where he was stepping, as it seemed the task of tearing his gaze away from his children was too monumental for the prince to manage. Colyette had never loved her husband more than she did in that moment. "They look just like you," Christofax whispered, and his voice cracked like it had back when they had both been younger together, when their courtship had just begun. It almost felt like a dream, lying there looking at their children after years of trying and failing and trying and failing. There had been rumors, not widely spread or loudly spoken, but hushed whispers about the palace that the princess consort was barren and could produce no heirs for the royal line. Colyette had borne the indignity with grace, refusing to allow the words she overheard to faze her, but it had been difficult to keep up. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she had wondered if perhaps they were right. Each night when Christofax would lie beside her and murmur how they would succeed one day, the sorrow and disappointment that he had tried to hide from her had made her heart break. Now the struggle was over, and the great burden was lifted from their shoulders. "Well, come on now, you needn't keep them all to yourself," she teased. "Let my little ones see their mother." Christofax, grinning like a schoolboy, shuffled closer, and Colyette managed with effort to heave herself up into a sitting position. One by one, the little bundles made their way from his outstretched arms to hers, and just seeing the upturned faces took her breath away. They were nearly identical, so small and red and puckered up, the tiny eyes squeezed shut, soft pudgy lips flapping as they squeaked and gibbered quietly. It was difficult to believe that until mere minutes ago they had lived inside of her, that she had grown these two new little people inside her own body. The small faces blurred as her eyes grew wet, and she felt Christofax's weight slide into the bed beside her, peering over the shoulder to keep looking at his sons. "They are beautiful," she whimpered, pulling her children closer to her breast with care, eager to hold them tight but nervous that any motion could break them. "The midwives bade me to tell you to feed them. They will be hungry after their long journey." Christofax reached up and slowly stroked her hair. "I cannot say how proud I am of you," Colyette scoffed. "I am hardly the first woman to have children," she demurred. Christofax kissed the top of her head. "You are the first woman to have my children," he replied. They remained that way for a while in silence. The babes suckled greedily from their mother, and both husband and wife simply watched. Colyette held the children, Christofax held Colyette, and for just those precious few moments, all was well. Everything was perfect, and the future before them was bright. The feeling struck her suddenly that something was about to happen, a certain premonition of poor tidings to come, and Colyette raised her head to look at the prince. Christofax was sat, holding his family, eyes far away and locked onto the chamber's windows. The midwives had thrown up the sash and opened the curtains to let the air in. They had claimed that the fresh air from outside was good for a woman recovering from birth, but Colyette hardly thought that the atmosphere inside the mountain city could be described as fresh. A part of her wanted nothing more than to leap out of bed, run to the edge of the city and burst out of the mountain, feel the sunlight on her face and the breeze in her hair. For now, though, she was far too tired to do anything of the sort. It was enough to just lay here with her children and her husband close at hand. Christofax sat up suddenly, and as she turned to look at him, Colyette detected just the tiniest hint of distress running across his features before it disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. She had been far too distracted during the labor to take notice of it, but something had definitely changed in him after he had left her side to meet with his father and the king's lance. She wondered if whatever odd paranoid fancy had gripped the king had been passed on to his son. "What is it?" She wanted to lay a hand on his shoulder, let him know that he could talk to her, tell her what it was that was troubling him all of a sudden. But with a child cradled in each arm, she had no more hands to spare. Christofax looked over his shoulder at her, and his expression softened. "We never thought about names, did we?" He quickly changed the subject, and Colyette knew that he was avoiding her question. She trusted her husband, trusted him enough to know that he would tell her what the matter was in time, and so she played along and scoffed at him. "Perhaps you have not, but I have had precious little else to do except think of names." "Oh?" He scooted closer to her, leveling a finger at the babe in the crook of her right arm, who had slipped off her breast and was now gently snoring. "So, what do you have in mind for this one?" Colyette glanced down at the sleeping child. Of the two twins, this one was smaller, and while the two were nearly identical in every way, there was a slight upturn of the nose that made the little brother distinct. "Well, we have to name them according to the honorifics of their stations, so the suffix might be a bit clumsy, but I like the sound of Kou." Christofax rubbed his chin. "Prince Kou, son of Christofax. I cannot say that I have heard of that name in our family tree before." "Should that matter?" "I suppose not. Anyhow, just look at him. He looks like a Kou, doesn't he?" Colyette chuckled a bit at that. "I have some of my own ideas for the other brother, but it is only fair that you get to pick the name for that one." Christofax looked excited at that, and he leaned over her lap, peering at where the larger brother of the two was still suckling hungrily. "He's a ferocious fellow, isn't he?" He laughed. "You would not be laughing so hard if he was clamping these tiny jaws on your chest. That much I can guarantee." Another quiet laugh and then silence as Christofax pondered the question. At length he spoke up again. "When I was a boy, I had an uncle. Not really my uncle, mind you, merely a friend of my father's, but he was like family to me." "Oh? I cannot remember ever meeting him." "You would not have had the chance. You and I had not even met when he went to the side of the One. It was back during the early days of the rebellion. I loved him like family, and I would want to honor him by giving my son his name." "You have a good heart, Christoph." She leaned over to kiss his cheek and meaningfully let out the honorific of his name. "Go on and tell me what it is then, and I promise to consider it even if it is a silly name." "Paolo." Christofax grinned down at his second son. "Paolax, son of Christofax, of the line of Egresia." Colyette thought about it. "Paolo and Kou," she said aloud. "They will be quite a pair growing up. Paolo and Kou, the Twiceborn." Christofax smiled so wide it looked as though his face would split asunder, and as she looked at him, bursting with pride, she felt again how fortunate she was that her betrothed prince had been the man that he was. There had been much trepidation about meeting him back when they had first met, back when she had left her home down at the southern shores of the peninsula to come to Ernhome and be wedded. At the time, she had thought that the crown prince would be a haughty, snooty, unbearable brute of a man, and she had begged her father not to send her away. But the marriage had been an important one, a union between the royal family and one of the speakers in the House of Representatives for the South, and it was in part thanks to their wedding that the rebellion had lost momentum and public support. Christofax had been nothing like she had expected, and it had been a surprise in the best way possible. The door to the chamber opened suddenly, and both parents turned to see who had entered. "By the One, I asked for us not to be Christofax's annoyance evaporated as he saw that it was not the physicians, nor midwives or nursemaids that had entered, but instead a young man, dressed in a fine velvet cloak and dark traveling clothes. Colyette recognized him as one of her husband's younger brothers, though she could not recall his name. He was one of the youngest, one born from the king's second wife. The boy was barely out of his growing years, still closer to a child than a man, so far as she was concerned. But he wore a grim expression of almost comic seriousness, and she had seen him about the palace often enough. He was tall and well-built, like most of his brothers, but his hair was black and his face was sharp and aquiline in contrast with Christofax's softer features. He was too young to sport a proper beard, but a few patchy wisps of struggling stubble were sprouting along his jaw and lips. Trotting into the bedroom just behind the young prince was another boy, this one even younger, perhaps only 18 years at the most, wearing an ill-fitting hauberk of mail and with an oversized helmet tottering on his head. Colyette recalled that Audax had a squire serving under him, a burgeoning youth still being trained and groomed as the prince's personal manservant, but she knew very little else about the boy.
"Audax,"
Christofax sighed.
"I thought... Yes, my apologies for interrupting. Brother, my lady."
Audax gave a curt nod to each of them.
"But time is of the essence, and the preparations for the city's defense are underway. We will not have much time to depart before the mountain is completely locked down."
"Locked down?
"What defenses? What are you talking about?"
Colyette protested, acutely aware that she was hardly in a position befitting a lady of her rank, still wearing the flimsy nightdress she had worn during labor, and still feeding at least one newborn from her breast. Indignantly, she pulled Paolo away and yanked up the hem of her gown to cover herself. The baby did not seem to mind, already falling asleep like his twin, and Colyette regarded Ardax severely. "What business do you have barging in here without so much as a knock, young man? Did your father simply forget to teach you proper etiquette when you were—"
"Again, I offer my apologies, my lady. But as I said, we have little time."
"Little time for what? Christofax, what is he talking about?" She glanced up at her husband, expecting him to come to her defense, but the look on Christofax's face was grave indeed. He had gone ashen pale, and a look of deep sadness and great guilt had washed over him. "Christofax?" she said again, and he turned to look at her.
"I had not wanted to tell you until after the labor was through. Tell me what? What is happening in the city? Is it another rebellion?"
The mere thought of another war starting again dropped a cold stone of terror into her belly, and she clutched to her children a little tighter.
"We do not know. Something has come up from the mountain under the mines and attacked our people. A king's lance is wounded, and my father has ordered the sealing off of the entire industrial district. All of Ernhome prepares now for the defense."
The world came crashing down around her ears at his words. How could this be? What could Andronax be thinking? What were the king's plans for her? Ardax spoke once more.
"You have my apologies, my lady, and my sympathy, but we cannot delay any longer."
"Brother, give me a moment to explain," Christofax interrupted. Ardax nodded again and turned to his squire.
"Thel, go to your mother and your father and tell them goodbye. We will meet you at the palace gates afterwards. Be certain to fetch us a covered wagon and 3 strong horses from the stables. Do you understand?"
The boy lifted 2 fingers to his temple and stood straighter.
"Aye, sir,"
he replied, before turning on his heel and clanking off once again, his oversized helmet wobbling atop his head. Thel, that was his name, Colyette recalled. The clockmaker's boy, that was it. He seemed very like his young master, both men quiet, focused, and humorless at the best of times. She had nothing against either the prince or his servant, but she hoped to avoid spending too much time around them, dour as they appeared to be.
"I do not understand,"
Colyette said in a small voice as Ardax gave another slight bow and exited the room.
Forgive me, my love."
"Don't try to ameliorate this, Christofax. Tell me the truth. What have you kept from me?" Without warning, she felt her temper flare. She had the sudden and intense premonition that something awful was about to happen, and it was her own personal belief that bad news should be delivered swiftly and frankly. Christofax looked askance.
"It is as Ardax said. The city is in danger."
"From what? Why have I not heard of this before?"
"It came quickly. My father only began the preparations for the defense 2 days ago."
"Why does Ardax need a wagon and horses? What does any of this have to do with me?" She could have guessed the answer, but she wanted to hear him say it. Christofax shuddered, closed his eyes, breathed deep, and answered softly.
"The king will do anything to ensure the continuation of our lineage. He will pay any price if it means protecting you and protecting our sons. Andronax has ordered that until the mountain is safe and secure, until the foe beneath the earth has been driven back and destroyed, you and our sons will be evacuated someplace safe, further south towards the coast."
Colyette gripped her sons tightly, save the graveness in her husband's eyes, and it didn't need to be spoken what else was eating at him.
"You will not be coming with us, will you?"
She hated the way her own voice quivered as she spoke. Even as the words left her lips, it felt wrong, foreign, like words spoken in a dream rather than reality. This was meant to be a happy day, a day of celebration. How could, in mere moments, everything have gone so wrong? Christofax leaned his hands on the bed frame, heaving another unhappy sigh.
"My father has forbidden me to accompany you. He claims that my duties to the city as prince outweigh my duties as husband, as a father."
"How can he say that?" Colyette protested. "What gives Andronax the right to—"
"He is king, and above that he is my father."
"And if I refuse to go?" Christofax met her eye. His face crumbled in dismay.
"Please, my love, do not make this harder for me than it already is."
"The palace must be just as safe as anywhere out in the countryside," Colyette argued. "Surely we can remain here, and after all, it is too soon for me to be traveling, so soon after the labor."
"Ardax has made arrangements. There will be servants going as well. Some of the midwives and one of our best physicians will go along to keep you safe and well, and to care for our sons."
"What does Ardax have to do with any of this?" Colyette snapped irritably. She had decided that she was not at all fond of the grim young man and his doggedly obedient squire.
"I cannot go with you, but my brother has agreed to watch over you and our sons until it is safe for you to return. There is a town, a little hamlet near an inlet from the coast, Broken Scar. 4 weeks on the road will see you there. It is not far from your home city, perhaps a few days' travel."
"Why not simply send us back to my father's house?"
"Andronax seeks to avoid making your departure public. How many of the city's people would be pleased to learn that the royals have been evacuated to safety while they remain trapped in a city at war?"
"But what is it that we are fighting? What is the threat? Ardax said something about beneath the mountain."
Christofax shook his head. "If the 5th spear is to be believed, and in his sorry state I do not know if he is, then we face the return of the Black Sires. Andronax believes it is to be true. I am not so certain."
Colyette laughed without humor. "Black Sires? Your father has lost his mind." Christofax's face grew dark.
"I may not agree with his decision, but I will not hear such talk. He is my father and he is our king. You will do as I have asked."
There was silence between them, a silence so dense that it felt as if it stretched across all eternity. Colyette felt hollow inside, almost forgetting her own children whom she cradled in her arms. Her mind was turmoil, arguing with herself about what course of action could be taken to avoid this fate. On the one hand, she had grown up in the south, grown up near the coast, and she would be nearby to her home city. Perhaps that in and of itself was not bad, but she would be separated from her husband, a whole country between them, while he led some mystery war against an opponent that could not possibly be what Andronax seemed to suspect. And she had Paolo and Kou to think of as well. Could she do this alone? The grim-faced brother of her husband would be there as well, certainly. But she barely knew Ardax, and what she did know she was not overly fond of. She had been promised that her sons would have a father to raise them into fine young men. For how long would she be forced to shoulder the burden alone? And what would become of her if, one forbid it, if Christofax were to die? "Come away with us," she spoke at length. "Andronax can be as cross as he wants. It will not matter why we are far away from here. You are not the king of Ernhome. You are my husband, and we need you." Christofax looked tempted, looked so eager to agree that Colyette felt almost certain that he would. But eventually she could see his eyes growing wet, and he managed to choke out a sob.
"The city needs me more."
It was done then. It seemed that whatever orders the king had given to his son, her words could do nothing to dissuade them. In that exact instant, Colyette would recall later on, her heart broke for the sacrifice that the newborn family was being asked to make. But the fight was lost, at least this one. She would contest this action no longer, and instead shifted her weight to hold her babies more comfortably. How long? When she could muster words again, she found herself eerily calm. She felt composed, prepared, as though her heart aching had been pulled out of her breast and locked in a trunk and replaced with one of purest steel.
Colyette, the wife of the prince, would retreat inwards. Colyette, the noblewoman, the princess consort, the stateswoman, would take the reins. As long as it takes to drive back the shadow. Christofax replied softly. It could be months, it could be years, but I will send messengers to you every month that we are parted. How soon do we depart? She refused to meet his gaze. It hurt and angered her to know that her husband had chosen duty over family, even if a part of her could understand why he had done it. It was less that it was happening at all and more that he had done so little to oppose it, or even to tell her that this sudden change was coming. 2 full days she could have prepared herself to make this trip, but now everything had come up upon her too quickly to process and adapt to. She felt, in that moment, far more exhausted than she had ever felt before. It would have been so easy to just fall asleep, to just close her eyes and pretend that what was happening was a mere bad dream. Audax will take care of the proceedings. None of that will be left to you. You need rest now, my love. Rest and recovery from your labor. We will send as many servants and helpers along with you as can be spared. Another silence stretched between them. Christofax looked regretful, sorrowful, as if he was wishing that he had not agreed to send his wife and children away after all. Darling, he said after a pause. Colyette was still not meeting his gaze, instead choosing to peer out of the window. She knew that if she looked into his eyes, that if the two of them had to be parted as husband and wife, that she would lose her composure. Her heart would burst out from the trunk and the steel organ would melt, and she would be in no condition at all to make this journey. She knew that she would remain in bed throughout most of the trip, lying in cushions in the back of Audax's wagon, tended to just as she would be here. But being so far from home, the home she had built with the man she loved, that would be too much to bear. Colyette, I do not wish this. Please understand, if it was up to me, I would keep you by my side no matter what. The king has demanded it. The words came from her lips, but it felt as though someone else was speaking. Her own voice sounded cold and hollow. Colyette, I understand that you are angry with me, but, well... He was suddenly sheepish. My love, will you kiss me one final time before you depart? I do not know if I have the strength to see you go without me. Colyette did not move. She could not decide what she wanted. On the one hand, she wanted to hurl herself into his arms, to hold him so tight that he could not slip away, and in that way force him to run away with her to the south, where they could raise their sons in peace. Paolo and Kou wriggled in her arms, still sleepy but just beginning to wake again. On the other hand, she was furious, angry at Christofax for taking the choice away from her, for not telling her sooner that this was going to happen. A part of her wanted to lash out in anger, to punish her wayward husband for his foolish and altogether selfish decision to keep this news from her. Certainly he had meant well, not wanting to burden her mind while she was in labor, but to suddenly spring this on her mere minutes after the children had arrived, she did not know if she could bring herself to show him any affection, lest she lose her composure again. Still, this would be her last chance for what could very well be years. The choice is yours.